Good day. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this month's installment of the Chamber Technology Engagement Center's Tech Talk series. This week, we are joined by Alan Davidson, who is the administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration at the Department of Commerce. Mr. Davidson is an internet policy expert with over 20 years of experience as an executive, public interest advocate, technologist, and attorney. And he most recently was a senior advisor at the Mozilla Foundation. He's also done other stints as well over at groups like CDT, and now leads the Department of Commerce's technology wing that oversees areas like broadband, 5G, and other information matters as well, too. And for those of you who have not joined our Tech Talk series, I'm Jordan Crenshaw, Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Technology Engagement Center. And I ask all of you all for you to join us at our website at AmericanInnovators.com to learn more about CTech. But we'll go ahead and kick things off with our conversation with Administrator Davidson. So, Administrator Davidson, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And thank you to the Chamber for hosting this.
Well, we're happy to have you, and always good to have someone who has some experience in the tech sector, working in government. And Administrator Davidson, you're no stranger to tech policy and issues. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are now?
Well, that's it could be a longer conversation, but it's great to be here today. And I will say, I think it's an exciting time to be at NTIA. The through line for me in terms of how I originally got here is really I've spent, my whole career really devoted to the idea that technology should serve human progress. And, I've been working in this space, I guess, really over 2 decades, more than 25 years, as a computer scientist, as a lawyer, as a public interest advocate, as you mentioned, and as an executive in the private sector. And in each of those things, I've really, tried to build and shape digital technologies in a way that connected people and made their lives better. And for me, that focus has largely been, on the internet, making sure people had access to the internet, making sure that access was equitable, thinking about making sure that the internet was a force for good in people's lives, giving them access to information, access to economic opportunity, access to human rights, and promoting that vision around the world has been a big part of what I've been able to do and tried to do. So for me, really, NTIA now and being at the Department of Commerce is a real natural extension of that. And I feel really lucky to have had the chance to build on the experiences I've had before, and particularly having done a tour of duty before at the Commerce Department. And that private sector experience, a lot of what we're working on at NTIA right now it's about executing against some pretty big missions we've been given, including a really historic opportunity to close the digital divide in this country, thanks to funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law. So it's an exciting time here on broadband, on spectrum issues we're working on new technology issues. So I really feel very fortunate to be here right now.
Well, I think you bring a lot of experience to this job to help figure out ways we can collaborate between different sectors and agencies and the private sector and the public sector. But wanted to talk a little bit about some of the collaborative work that's been done between FCC and NTIA. And recently in March, the two agencies announced the launch of the Spectrum Coordination Initiative to strengthen spectrum coordination and policy processes.
Right.
Can you provide an update as to what the initiative has achieved so far and what are some of the anticipated next steps?
It's a great question. I mean, the starting point for us is really, NTIA, I should say, to step back, has really dual imperatives in this spectrum space. We serve as the coordinator of federal spectrum, and we also serve as we're really focused on making sure that federal agencies have the spectrum they need to meet their missions. But we also serve as the president's advisor on telecommunications and information policy and on spectrum issues. And so we really feel that imperative to make sure that the commercial needs for spectrum, that the private sector needs for spectrum are also met, so that we have a competitive wireless industry, so that we can give people the services that they need. And so meeting those dual imperatives is really at the heart of what we do. And honestly, if you look at the landscape over the last months and years, there are a lot of reasons to feel the federal government could be doing better than it has been doing. And there have been some pretty, high profile, concerns and conflicts raised about how spectrum is being allocated. I look at the aviation sector, there's other areas. And, we want to do better. And I think a key part of that is about better coordination within the federal community, between the federal users and also with the FCC. And so when I started, the chairwoman of the FCC, Chairwoman Rosenworcel, and I really were committed, decided to really spend real energy together to make sure that as a starting point, the FCC and NTIA were really well coordinated in the work that we're doing. So we launched the Spectrum Coordination Initiative early in my tenure in March. Actually, I think we announced it to late February, and we have had, and the idea was really to make sure our teams were meeting regularly, that we were exchanging technical information, that we committed to working on a spectrum strategy together, to working on some big technical coordination projects together. And we've had real success so far. We have been meeting quite regularly, very regularly. We've exchanged technical staff on some of our advisory committees. And we're deep into renegotiating the MOU that exists between FCC and NTIA. And just a couple weeks ago, we announced that I talked to the chairwoman, and we announced that we were going to have that MOU drafted, that renegotiated MOU drafted by the end of July. So we're making progress. There's a lot of work to do, but at least it's a good start. And these are the kinds of confidence building measures we hope to take to show how serious we are about the next steps on spectrum for this administration.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear about the coordinated efforts that you all have. I think I wanted to stick around on some of the wireless issues as well. And can you tell us a little bit about some of the work that NTIA is doing to ensure that we continue to lead with secure 5G networks?
Yeah, that's. I think it's really important. It's essential that we have secure networks, and I think folks have seen in recent years how concerned the federal government has been, and concerned that a lot of the private sector has as well, about the security of some of the 5G equipment that's being deployed around the world. So we're eager to build on that work that's being done, and particularly at NTIA, we've been thinking a lot about supplier diversity in the 5G space, and making sure that there's a broad set of secure providers that wireless networks can use and can be built on top of, and not just the leading Chinese networks that network equipment that we were concerned about a few years ago. So for us, that really looks like first and foremost support for open interoperable networks like Open RAN. We've been big supporters of the Open RAN technology stack and initiative. We're working with other governments around the world, like-minded governments, for example, in the Quad, to really promote Open RAN as a technology around the world. And there's a set of principles, the Prague principles on telecommunications, supplier diversity. We've been big fans of promoting those as ways to promote technology, and technology that I think that American manufacturers are going to be a big part of. And I think that's of great interest for us. Another thing we're really excited about here is if the Bipartisan Innovation Act passes, there's a $1.5 billion public wireless supply chain innovation fund, an innovation fund that we will be administering and using to promote technologies like Open RAN. So we're very hopeful about that legislation, and I think you'll see us leaning in more and more on promoting secure networks around the world in 5G.
I couldn't agree with you more about the need to lean in to get the bipartisan competition and innovation legislation across the finish line. Especially, I know some of your partner agencies within Commerce are pushing the CHIPS Act as well too. So
for sure.
It's
I would be remiss if I didn't, put a plug in for it. At Commerce Department, we are all in for that, and thank you at the Chamber for your support as well on this work.
Well, speaking of other legislation, we obviously were supportive of passage of the infrastructure bill that passed a few months ago, and your agency is tasked with implementing the vast majority of the broadband provisions there. And actually last month, NTIA released the notice of funding opportunity through the Internet for All initiative, establishing the timeframes and processes in place for that program. And one of the provisions that requires to establish a middle-class affordability program is also in there. Can you describe how NTIA envisions states pursuing this requirement?
Sure. And just a quick step back, like you said, this is it's a historic opportunity right now, right? We've been talking about the digital divide in this country for over 20 years. Finally, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've been given real resources across the federal government to do something serious about it. And so we take that responsibility quite seriously. And we've been tasked, our mission, modest mission, is to connect everyone in America, rural America, urban America, with high-speed, reliable, affordable internet access. And it's a generational moment to do that. And so we're taking it very seriously. It's probably the biggest thing that we're working on here at NTIA. A key thing is that affordability is a pretty core component of that. It doesn't do a lot of good for a family if we've, built a new, if we've run a wire past their house or gotten them the ability to get online, but they can't afford the connection. And Congress, when it built the program, really focused on that as well. And so we've given, the bulk of the money that we're going to be giving out is going to go through states. And we've given states lots of flexibility about how to address these affordability issues. There's three things we've asked for them to do. One, we're requiring them, as the statute does, to have a low-cost option. That's going to be for really low-income families. So anybody who gets federal money has to have that low-cost option. A second thing is that the affordability of offerings needs to be a factor that states consider when they give out the money. And the last thing is we did ask states to think about what we call a middle class affordability, the need for working families to also be able to afford to get online. If we're going to be spending federal money to build these networks, we think that working families ought to also have a shot at being able to afford them. And we give states a lot of ideas about how to meet that need. It could be that they decide to add additional subsidies. It could be that they put a lot of weight on the affordability criteria when they're giving out money. There could be structural approaches that they take. We're really eager to see what states do here as the laboratories of democracy. But we do think it's important that when federal money is being given out, that there should be some affordability component for working families and low-income Americans.
No, I think that's one of the things that we wanted to make sure, as part of the equation. Obviously, you have to do build out, but you also have to have affordability at the same time.
Yeah.
And great to hear your thoughts on that as well. I wanted to chat a little bit about some of the deployment side. Then,
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't be doing my job if we weren't talking about the importance of the private sector and deploying broadband across the country, especially in the areas where it's hardest to reach. Do you think the private sector is the sector that should take the lead role in deployment through this program?
I mean, it should. The private sector should take the lead, and it will take the lead. I mean, there's no question that these networks are going to be built first and foremost by the private sector. And our story of investment in broadband has been a success story in so many ways. And we know that the private sector in many different forms is going to be running now to fill this next frontier, fill this next gap in our connectivity where we haven't gotten connectivity out there. I should say, that, we also should recognize that we are filling a gap here, right? There are places where private sector investment alone has not brought broadband to everybody, where federal investment is needed, where projects are not economical now, but if we give that federal investment to do the build out, they'll be economical for the private sector to operate. So we see this as a real partnership, and we've built, we tried to write these notices in a way that made it clear that they're, with an eye towards making it so that the private sector is going to have a leading role, and that these are implementable programs, and where we hope to attract lots of different players here. There'll be, established providers who've been doing this for years. There may be new providers who step in at this moment when there's a lot of funding. And we're excited to see all those different approaches to making sure that we connect everybody in the country.
Kind of taking it even a step further back on technology, obviously broadband and connectivity are going to power emerging technologies. Do you at NTIA plan on taking a role and looking at ways to bolster competitiveness when it comes to the U.S. developing emerging tech?
I mean, we are looking at those issues. It's essential. We've seen it. Technology is a huge part of supporting our economic growth and our competitiveness globally. We've been really fortunate here in the U.S. to have a technology sector, particularly in the kind of internet and telecommunication space. We have the world's leading companies, and when I go around and talk to people around the world, they are still always very eager to hear how they too can kind of build a technology industry like we have here. At the same time, we should really recognize that we do have serious global competitors too, and particularly in authoritarian states, in places like China, where in some ways their technology sector has been given an unfair leg up, and we need to compete in that landscape. So I think we are eager here, and I think throughout the administration, to make sure that we're doing what we can to bolster our technology sector, and particularly in the areas of emerging technology. My hope is that NTIA can play a continued leading role there as well. We see it on issues like spectrum, where we're at the front lines of this work, and we see the level of innovation that's coming, new bands of spectrum that we never imagined using before, new techniques that we want to support and invest in, like spectrum sharing tools. And so you'll see more of that coming from us. I also hope that we'll be a helpful voice in promoting innovation as we think about policy in other areas, like how we promote responsible artificial intelligence deployments, how we think about privacy or competition. Those are areas where NTIA has had a role. Cybersecurity is another one, and making sure that we're thinking about promoting innovation and promoting American values in these technologies is going to be important going forward. And I'm excited about NTIA playing a role there.
I think that's an excellent point. I think we in the business community especially saw when agreements were made between Russia and China on collaboration on tech, especially things like AI, really emphasized the need for the U.S. and other like-minded countries to really work on competitiveness in those fields. And really appreciate your thoughts there.
Yeah, no, and I would just say, even to chime in there, it also means being more engaged in the standards bodies. I think China particularly has done a really, they've been very strategic about their engagement on standards, and in bodies like the ITU, Russia as well. And so I think you're going to see us doing more to make sure that we're being strategic as well, and taking a long view about U.S. engagement, which will ultimately be led by the private sector. But we want to make sure it's a level playing field, and in particularly those places where governments do play a role, like the ITU. We're really promoting, for example, new leadership at the ITU. Doreen Bogdan-Martin is a great American candidate who's running for Secretary General of the ITU this year, and we're very supportive of her candidacy. And that's a way, for example, of being strategic about our engagement on standards.
Excellent. Well, glad to hear your involvement there. Glad to hear the coordination on the government in terms of maintaining leadership on that front. Wanted to switch gears a little bit, maybe surprising to some and not to others. This summer on Capitol Hill has become the summer of privacy. I know over the years, NTIAs looked at privacy from various perspectives. There were the multi-stakeholder processes on things like drones and facial recognition. There was talk during the last administration about developing a standard around national privacy. And I know also during this administration, there's been talk about the intersection of civil rights and data collection and data privacy. What role do you see NTIA playing in the debate over protecting the privacy and security of Americans?
Yeah. Well, just as a starting point, obviously, we need to do more as a country to make sure that we're protecting personal privacy and security, and to do that while also protecting innovation, which I think we can do. And so doing those things, promoting privacy, it's a priority for the administration. And the administration's already called for action in this area. We've got it was in the executive order on competition, there were some big call outs on privacy. The Federal Trade Commission's doing a huge amount of work. The President in the State of the Union talked about kids' privacy and the work that we need to do to protect children online. So there's a huge amount to do here, and I think a real bipartisan interest in doing more to protect Americans online. NTIA, we are not the regulator, right? There will be others, the Federal Trade Commission, for example, who are going to be at the front lines of enforcing our consumer protection laws. But we have a role on policy, and our statutory mandate is to be the president's advisor on telecommunications and information policy. And so we have engaged on these issues and will continue to be pretty engaged on this question of privacy because it's so central, and of course something that I personally feel very connected to. We stand ready and have offered technical have been asked for technical assistance on some of the bills that have been put forward. There are efforts that we're undertaking here as well to try and promote, push the ball forward in thinking on privacy. So we've engaged on a work stream, a listening tour around privacy, equity, and civil rights. I think a very important aspect of the privacy debate. And I think, stay tuned for more, but we will soon have a request for comment going out around those issues. And our hope is to engage there and put together some recommendations or options for policymakers who are thinking about those things too. So we're engaged. I think this is an incredibly important area for us to make progress on, both to protect Americans. It will ultimately, having good guardrails helps innovation, and I think it will help our standing in the world if we can make real progress in the privacy and security debate here.
I guess one final kind of parting question for you. Are there any areas we should be looking out for in the private sector we haven't talked about today, or other ways we can be helpful as the business community for the work that NTIA is doing?
Well, I think, engaging on these, first of all, this is, on our work, a lot of this is work that the private sector needs to take the lead on. So I would say, first of all, engaging in the privacy debate and the conversation on Capitol Hill, being flexible and open and minded and thinking about the long game here, which is ultimately we are better off. We can provide more. The private sector can be more innovative if it has the kind of guardrails around its work, if everybody understands what the rule space looks like. And that's going to be true in privacy. It's long term. It's going to be true in other emerging technology areas like AI, where you see Europe moving to regulate in this space, and we need an answer to how we're going to make sure that there are good guardrails out there, while at the same time really promoting innovation. And more broadly, I would just say we really do want to partner with the private. This is an all hands on deck moment when you think about issues like broadband deployment. I mean, and I'll just close by just say, like generations before us, brought water and electricity to rural America. They built the interstate highway system. This is our generation's moment. This is a really unprecedented, this does not happen very often when we spend these kinds of resources to connect everybody in America. And so I would just say this is, in the years ahead, we really look forward to partnering with the private sector, with stakeholders all across America to make sure that we are meeting this generation's moment and connecting everyone in America, and look forward to working with the Chamber on that as well.
Well, Assistant Secretary Davidson, I appreciate all the hard work you all are doing to put in to really take advantage of this generational opportunity to connect all Americans.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you for joining us today, and we look forward to
Yeah.
working with you to ensure that goal is met. And then I want to thank everyone today for joining as well too. Once again, this is our regular Tech Talk series on all issues, technology and policy. But I would encourage everyone who has any interest in learning more about what the Chamber is doing on this area to visit AmericanInnovators.com. Administrator Davidson, thank you again. And I want to thank everyone else for joining today as well.